Okay.
So welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm really thrilled to be able to welcome Cheryl Pruitt and Mark Turner from the CSU system and their Accessibility Technology Initiative, which is referred to as ATI. They have a wealth of information to share with us. They've been doing some extensive work with their system of multiple campuses. I believe it's 23 campuses in your whole system. And one of their focuses is accessible procurement, which will be our topic today. So before I turn the mic over to them, just want to encourage people to participate in this conversation, ask questions. If you're not talking, we'll keep mics off. And you can also use the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat if you want to post comments there. So I think we're doing pretty good in terms of sound quality today, much better than last month, so we'll hope that this holds. And welcome, Mark and Cheryl. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, Marlene, thank you very much. This is Cheryl at the CSU. I'm the Accessible Technology Initiative Director. And with me today is Mark Turner. He's our Associate Director. And I'd like to start today by saying that I love Montana. I've spent many happy summers there. I'm kind of glad I'm not there now because you guys are really cold, but it's such a beautiful state, and I'm really happy that we have this opportunity to present to you today. So let me just give you a little context about what Mark and I do and a little bit about our system. We don't actually work on a campus, so some of your questions that are totally campus related, we might not have a clear answer as you might like. But we do get a really big picture. We do interact with all of our campuses, and we get a chance to really move this initiative forward here in California. The CSU, we are the largest public baccalaureate degree granting institution in the United States. We have campuses all throughout the state, from the north clear down to the south, several in Central California, 23 total campuses. Right now we have about 437,000 students, and about 11,800 of those students are registered with our campus disability services offices. So those are the folks that have identified that they may need assistance with accessible technology. But we also serve all of our students, many of whom may be students with English as a second language. Maybe they're not identified to our disability service office, but they can certainly benefit from accessible technologies. And of course, everyone's using all kinds of different devices now, which also, the more accessible electronic information that we can provide, the better it's going to work on all those devices. So with that being said, I have a poll question which you can take a moment to read, and then we will go over how to answer that in just a moment. But I just wanted to quickly run through that I will be giving you some of our general strategies. We're going to have several more poll questions, and then we will be focusing on the procurement and acquisition of accessible instructional, or non-instructional, accessible information technology. So let's start off with a little poll question here. If you haven't used the polling function before, if you look right above the chat window, the fourth button over from the left, you'll see an A. And if you put your cursor over that, you'll see A, B, and C, so you can make a choice. So our question is, did your campus have an accessibility effort before the legal action at University of Montana? Now, everyone should be able to choose A, B, or C because you either had one, didn't have one, or you don't know. And we really appreciate it if everybody participates in this poll. So we'll give you a few seconds there to answer. And let me just say also the responses you're giving are not visible to the group. This is something where we'll just publish the aggregate results to the whiteboard as soon as we're done collecting the answers. So don't be shy. We've got about 7 of you that have answered, and I think we're just about done. I see just maybe a couple people who haven't. Okay, so let's have Mark publish those results then to the window. Okay, so we have 7 of you, or 7 campuses, I hope, that did have an accessibility effort. We have a few that didn't, and nobody that didn't know. So that's really great. Even if you didn't have an accessibility effort, and this might have been even a minimal effort, maybe it wasn't very effective according to Jessica and Corey in the chat window, you probably have some folks on your campus who are accessibility advocates. So even if you haven't had a formal effort, but you're starting out now, look for those people, because they will be great supporters of your new effort, and they will also join your effort with knowledge and be able to help others on your campus. Okay, so we could clear those results then, please. Thanks for participating in that. So I wanted now to talk a little bit about moving your institution towards accessibility. And Marlene, I think we're at slide 4 now, and I did have a URL that you could put into the chat for me, please.
Sure, I'll grab that, Cheryl. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. When we talk about making this move toward accessibility, we are talking about a cultural change. That's a big deal. We want to change the way people think. How they're thinking about their jobs, how to create, build, buy, and adopt products and services that universally serve the greatest number of your campus community, no matter how they want to interact with that product. So anytime we talk about cultural change, big job. And that's going to take an institution-wide effort. What that means is we need to integrate this accessibility into all of our existing campus business processes. So the way we were doing things may not be the same way that we are going to do things in the future. So we want accessibility to be part of our daily work, not a bolt-on, not an add-on, not something we do after everything else is done. So those two things taken together, really big job. Now, Marlene's put a link into the chat, and those are our accessibility implementation tools and resources. We have one page where I put together all the resources that they're also spread all over the place on several websites that we have, but this makes a nice, convenient, however ugly page, but you can access a lot of materials from this page. You'll see assessments on that page. Those are our goals and our success indicators. In other words, we have goals that our system is working toward and success indicators that are the things that need to be done to meet those goals. You'll be overwhelmed by that, but I think it's well worth looking those over and seeing how they might fit into your institution. So realizing this is a big job, it's a big job for the folks implementing, and it's really important to have that strong executive support. You need the president or chancellor of your institution to totally endorse this project. You need people at the vice president's level to really strongly support this and help shepherd through the things that need to be done. Also, please don't feel shy about asking a question at any time that I'm talking. I'm happy to change gears, and this is for Montana, and we want to be sure we're covering things that are going to help you. Okay, so we see we have a really big job ahead. It's going to involve our whole campus. So we wanted to share some of the strategies that have helped us through the years. Now, we've been doing this since 2007. So you might say, well, wow, that's quite a while, like going on 7 years. You guys probably have it all dialed in. We do not have it all dialed in. We have learned a whole lot of things during the 7-year period that we hope will benefit you from making some of the same mistakes that we did. So we've got some strategies that we focus on. Policy. Here's an area I know you guys are working in. You're trying to come up with what's the policy going to be to move your institution forward. It should be clear and it should be enforceable, and it may take you a while to kind of get to the policy that really works for you. We've gone through, I think, 4 policy revisions in the 7 years that we've been working on this. Our first policy was very to the point. We had a set of goals. We said, here's the deadlines, you better be done, and we didn't give much information about how to do anything. And we found, and had that memo or had that policy been effective, we'd be all done now. But we learned that that's not how this works. So having that clear policy and also getting buy-in and maybe making sure that you bring the stakeholder groups in that are going to be affected by the policy to make sure that what you're proposing can actually be done is really important. It's important to target or to build capacity. You probably don't have the resources, the trained personnel to do everything you'd like to do. So you may have to first target really high impact areas, not try to do everything at once. Use procurement to drive that accessible technology in your institution, and of course we'll be talking more about that today. Collaborate with vendors to make those product improvements. We'll also be talking more about that. Assessment. Assess how your institution is doing. Your policy, your institutional plan should be followed up with how did we do on what we planned to do. And finally, connect, just like you are today. Connect with CSU. There's lots of institutions in the United States. North Carolina, I think Greg Krause talked to you guys last month. Penn State. Many institutions are working toward this. In our own state, we have our community college district, which has 112 campuses, and the UCs. And they're all working toward the same thing. I think, Marlene, we have a question in the chat. Can you read that for me? Marlene?
Well,
how about if
I'll go ahead. Sorry about that. I was reading through the chat and just getting down to the question.
Okay.
If the policy needs to be flexible, did you find running it through OCR for changes to be an impediment? And if so, how did you address that?
Well, I think first my question is running it through OCR. Are you saying having OCR review the policy before we put it in place? Is that what you're referring to there? Okay. We have not done that. Of course, remember that our policy that we're issuing is at a system-wide level. So we're issuing a policy that goes out to 23 campuses. And they're most likely, or are in many cases, creating supplemental policies that are actually enforced on their campus. But no, we have not done that with our particular policy. We do run it through the legal counsel for our system, however. Okay? All right, so let me then move from strategies on to our next poll question. So we've talked about cultural change, institution-wide effort, executive support. Now how about the buy-in on your campus? How about the whole rest of the campus community? So my next poll question for you guys is, has an accessibility awareness campaign been started on your campus? So once again, you can go to the A, B, or C. And while you're answering that, I want to talk a little bit about why that might be important. Do the folks on your campus even know you're starting something? And do we want to present it to them that we're going to have accessibility, and that means it's going to be a whole lot of extra work for everybody? That really isn't the best way to present this to folks. I think in our system we kind of got off to a rocky start in getting our campus communities educated about why we're doing it, what we're doing, what we're going to do before we did it. In other words, we're going to move toward this accessible technology. We are going to have a plan. We're going to keep you involved, advised. We have resources. We're going to provide training. So, Mark, have we got most folks answered there? Okay. Okay, so if we could wrap up the answers there, that'd be really good. We have 8 responses so far. All right, we'll go ahead and publish those results, Mark. Okay, so we have 5 positive responses, a couple or 3 that haven't started, and nobody that didn't know, so that's really great. So we just want to encourage you to have that accessibility awareness campaign to get that buy-in from all the folks on your campus. Okay, you could go ahead and clear that, Mark. Okay, because we're going to have a lightning round now, and we're going to answer these questions really fast. We're moving into the accessible procurement part of our discussion, and so I'd like you to answer these questions as quickly as possible. Number 1, does your institution have standardized contract language for purchasing accessible information technologies? Okay. We have 6 responses so far, and I'm on countdown here. 3, 2, 1, publish. Okay, wow, 6 of the campuses do have contract language. I do see a comment in the chat that says it might not be effective. Well, at least we're starting, though. That's important. Okay, so let's go on to the next question, please. Share those results.
And Cheryl, I might just mention that probably these responses are from individuals, and many of us are on the same campus. Mm-hmm. So these are responses of individuals rather than numbers of campuses.
Right, and that's fine. And the point of the lightning round and the poll questions is more just let's get our minds thinking about the things we're going to talk about in just a moment.
Yes, great.
Thank you. So, are you familiar with the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, the VPAT? So let's get those answers rolling in. And we have 6 responses so far. 3, 2, 1, publish. Mark hit clear. Could we re-answer that one real quick? Okay. Familiarity with the VPAT one more time. We're on countdown. 3, 2, 1. A couple more of you. Come on. Let's go, 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 go. Okay. Publish, Mark. Publish. Okay, so we have 6 yeses, 2 no's. Okay, good. So we understand that's one of the important documents. Let's go on to the next question. Okay, has anyone on your campus had opportunities to work with vendors to improve the accessibility of their products? This is an important area, so let's get those answers rolling in. We have 3, 2, 1. A couple more of you, come on. And come on. Okay, publish. Okay, so 5 of you are yes, One know and one doesn't know. Okay, so that's great. I'm glad to hear that some of you have actually been working with these vendors. And our final question, has anyone on your campus developed processes for testing the accessibility of products? Let's answer this last one, and then we'll move into our little procurement talk here. Okay, come on, come on, come on. 3, 2, 1, and publish. Okay, 5 yes, 2 no, and someone isn't sure. Okay, great. All right, so we're ready to move ahead, and let's clear the polling, and we'll get on to accessible procurement. Now, as I recall, Marlene had put in the announcement to you folks about the meeting that we've been working on perfecting kind of a generic procurement process that we could then help our campuses to implement throughout the system. As you know, we have a lot of campuses and there's a lot of variation in how they're handling their procurements. And it was kind of frustrating for a lot of them to try to understand how should this work. So we spent, I mean, it seems like a crazy amount of time, but we spent 2 entire years kind of engineering through what the processes were for just procuring things in general, and where were the touch points, where did accessibility need to be integrated into the process, and who needed to be involved in that. So I'm going to kind of try to condense like 2 years of work into this, you know, half-an-hour thing here.
So Cheryl, I'm just going to interject that in the chat, some people are saying that it would be great if we could spend more time talking about culture change. So I'm just going to mention that next month, Sue Cullen from CSUN will talk about their work with culture change there too. So if we don't have a lot of time for that today, we'll definitely be hitting on that more.
Right, and certainly we can revisit the cultural change. I'll run through this procurement, and I think we'll have a little more time to talk about that. So the folks in the Innovation Studio might want to be thinking about exactly, you know, maybe a little more granular questions about cultural change, or if not, we can certainly share what we've learned about that. So I think it's important to recognize that just because accessible procurement seems to be related only to the procurement office, that needs to be a myth that's dispelled early on in your thoughts about buying accessible products. Several of our campuses tried to say, okay, it's a procurement problem. Procurement, buy accessible things. Well, that takes training, it takes document review, it takes everybody working together. So I hope that when you get ready to design the process at your institution, you look at this as a global thing that involves a lot of different roles and responsibilities. So what we've identified here, and I'll just run through this 6-item list and then we'll elaborate a little more in just a moment. First, we need a process that identifies when an electronic and information technology or E&IT purchase is being made. How do we know someone's even buying this product? Do we know when the requisition is submitted to procurement and by that time the person is expecting whatever good or service they're trying to buy within some short amount of time, which gives no time for anyone to really do anything? So once we know that the product or service is being procured, then is there a process in place to determine the level of the product accessibility? Then do we have a way to engage the vendor in an accessibility conversation? Do we have a way to get a commitment from our vendors to improve a product? Do we have contract language that covers the product accessibility? Any agreements that we've made with the vendor, or perhaps generic language that we feel is important to include on every contract? And finally, is there an equally effective access plan in place for a product that has accessibility gaps? Which I'd like to just say right now, I've yet to purchase the 100% accessible product. Many products are pretty good, many are not so good, most of them have gaps. We should be addressing those gaps when we buy the product and know how we're going to handle a situation if a student needs an accommodation or a workaround in order to use the product effectively. So we're going to look at those things in a little more detail in just a moment. Now, getting back to who's involved in this process, as I mentioned, this is a shared responsibility. It starts with the purchase requester, the person who's actually asking that the product or asking for the product. That person knows why they're buying the product and they know who they're buying the product for, hopefully. I mean, those are two important things. The administrative support staff is involved. For a while in our system, some of our departments were saying, well, the administrative support staff is submitting their requisitions so they can worry about if it's accessible or not. Well, that's not really the job of administrative support staff, and they really aren't trained to do that. But they have a part here, but it's not the whole part. The buyer, which I just mentioned a moment ago, that used to be the place where some campuses thought all of the accessibility responsibilities should take place. Most procurement folks are there to make sure that all of the legal and policy documents are in place for a particular purchase and that you get the product that you asked for and that the contract is correct. They're like the watchdog. So a really good thing that they can do is make sure that everything that you put into your accessible procurement process has been done before they actually buy the product. IT staff, you need folks with some level of technical expertise. That's your IT staff, and they can certainly assist. Your disability service staff assists with creating the equally effective access plan. They also shouldn't be made responsible, and we've seen this as well. Some of our campuses tried to make disability services fully responsible for purchasing accessible goods. They're a player. They can help with accommodations and suggestions for workarounds, but it's really not their full responsibility either. Your vendor or your E&IT product service provider, they certainly have a role in this. I mean, they have responsibilities to fulfill with you. And the next role, the ATI designee or other designee that I bolded here, that's a role that is not been clearly defined on our campuses that we're going to lobby to make that better defined. That is a person, especially while you're still in transition here, who understands the laws, who understands how to read a VPAT, who's been trained, who knows the standards you're using, who can talk with a vendor, knows who to talk to with the vendor. That designee can work with the purchase requester, work with the buyer, disability services, kind of pulls it all together. And finally, an executive sponsor. That's that VP level person that's going to help you shepherd this process, help you reverse engineer what's happening on your campus and how can we re-engineer it to include accessibility. So that's the really quick tour of roles and responsibilities and processes here. So let's then revisit the process and kind of put the roles into that process. Now, when I was talking to Marlene before this, before I prepared this, she was asking me, well, how does the CSU know when a faculty member is, maybe making a small purchase for a classroom or adopting something that is not going to go through procurement? Because procurement is also acquiring things. They may be open source, free, who knows. They may be a gift from someone. They come all different places. So there is no tried and true way to know what faculty do on every front. But what we identified was that having some kind of a pre-purchase acquisition form that was easy for the purchase requester to fill out. Doesn't ask a lot of questions. Does ask for 2 sentences to be put in that explain what the product does, and also who is it for, how many people, so we can make some kind of impact assessment. And then however you route that form, whether it be to the ATI designee or some other person on your campus that handles such things, that's sort of the first step here. Now I'm not sharing the forms that we've just made because they're not quite finished yet, but I do have a sample at CSU Channel Islands, which Marlene's already put into the chat, where you can kind of see what this type of form might look like. Who fills that out? The purchase requester. Where does it go? To that ATI designee or other designee. Second process, we want to determine the level of accessibility. So we need to review as a starting point, the product accessibility documentation. Most commonly, that's the voluntary product accessibility template, or the VPAT. Now, on the previous URL that Marlene put in, on that page at the bottom under Other Resources is one link to procurement. On that procurement page is the template that the CSU uses or sends to our vendors to fill out. Now, big vendors like Microsoft, Adobe, they're not going to fill that out. You're going to have to take what they give you and be happy. But if it's a smaller vendor and you can have them fill it out for your institution, doing it the way that you would like it done, then that's certainly a good way to do it. So we want to get that VPAT. In our system, we try to ask the vendor for some kind of test results. How did you come up with the claims on your VPAT? It's not okay for the salesperson to just write anything that they want to write. So we want to look at that documentation. That requires the trained personnel. That might be the ATI designee. If you don't have a designee and you train an IT staff person to do that particular job, then that's another good way to do it, or whoever you determine on your campus. But just please understand, it does take training and it takes practice to do a VPAT review. And you can actually get quite a bit out of a VPAT review, more than you might think. Often we hear, well, they're all wrong and you can't ever trust them. Well, if you've read a lot of VPATs, you can tell, does this vendor have a clue on accessibility, or is this totally wrong? And that starts that process to engage the vendor in the accessibility conversation. That VPAT document opens that door for you. Reviewing that document and just simply noting on it where it doesn't make sense, that you need more information to know how the particular standard is supported, or why it isn't supported, or what are the exceptions that aren't supported. Those kind of things can be sent back to the vendor. You can ask for clarification or ask them to revise that document. Starts that conversation. In our system, we cannot possibly do actual accessibility testing on every product that we buy. And in the past few years, we've had such bad budget problems that we could barely test anything. We did not have the resources to do that. So we've really refined our document review process because that's all we had. And we've had pretty good results in a lot of cases with that. If you do have the funds to do testing and it's a high-impact product, then by all means do the testing. Maybe you use a third party. Maybe you pay a third party to do those for you. Maybe you've got trained staff on your campus. That ATI designee certainly should be the one, or person that you give those responsibilities to, should be the one that engages the vendor and helps determine if the accessibility actual testing needs to be done. After we do this review and engage the vendor, we want to get some kind of commitment from the vendor to work on the accessibility gaps that were identified either in the documents or in your testing, And we want them to create what we call an accessibility roadmap. That's another document that's on that procurement page that is on the resource page we looked at earlier. The accessibility roadmap asks the vendor to list the gaps, the accessibility shortcomings, and give us some kind of remediation timeline. When are they going to fix these things? This, of course, improves the product for everyone, but also when you go to build your equally effective access plan, you have some clue about when some of these things might be fixed, which is useful information when you're serving someone that may be having a problem accessing the product properly due to some barrier that hasn't been corrected. I hope I'm not going. Be sure to interrupt me if you have questions. Next, okay, so now we've reviewed the documents, tested if necessary, determined the impact, had a conversation with the vendor, gotten an accessibility roadmap. So we're going to have contract language that covers, maybe in some cases, the actual purchase. I have a question I see in the chat. In just a moment, I'll get to that.
The question is who decides if the roadmap timeline is acceptable? So we'll hold on to that question, Cheryl.
Okay, and I'll address that in just a moment. So sometimes we have standardized, we do in this system have standardized language that's generic and it's included in our general provisions. And we do have another link that Marlene can put in the window, as well as I've included a sample of that language on slide 17, which we can look at in a minute or two. So we have that kind of language, and then depending on the roadmap and what was discussed with the vendor, again, and what the impact is, we may want to have some customized language in the contract as well. So the question in the chat is, who decides if the roadmap timeline is acceptable? Well, that goes to how your process works. Usually there's not a lot of negotiation there. What we're trying to do is partner with our vendors, get them to understand why we need these gaps corrected. You have to decide if their timeline is acceptable for you to buy the product. We had a case where some of the major barriers aren't going to be resolved for 2 years. Well, is that going to be okay? Maybe not. Maybe we aren't going to buy the product because of that. But maybe the vendor can't do it any more quickly. But maybe there's that market research we did that says there's another product out there that does the same thing that's a lot more accessible at this point. So maybe we're going to have to tell the vendor with the 2-year timeline that we really like your product, but due to the barriers and the fact you can't correct them for 2 years, we won't be able to buy the product for 2 more years. So there's really no cut and dried way to say who decides that. It's up to your campus and your purchasing process how that gets decided. And I'd like to also mention when we're talking about the roadmap, we've had real good success with our vendors in the roadmap. First, they're all confused. What? A roadmap? What do you mean? It's a secret. Well, it doesn't need to be a secret, and we need to know, and we're very upfront about why we need to know. We need to know because we have to make that equally effective alternate access plan. And if we don't know what you're doing, and also in our roadmap we ask if there's any known workarounds for any of the barriers, we need that. And they seem to finally understand that we're not just asking for no reason at all. So we have had very good success with that. And what we usually do is make it dependent on the contract renewal. We cannot be following up all year long to see if things were done. We just do a contract renewal time. So finally, after the roadmap and all, then we put together an equally effective alternate access plan. Now, why are we doing this? Because we want to be prepared to serve our students. We want to be serving them at the same time as everyone else. We don't want to say, oh my God, here's the problem, we have problems, and we have to figure out what to do. We want to have a plan on file. Student is in the course, needs help, we already know what we're doing. The side effect of doing the equally effective alternate access plan is you're helping reduce the risk at your campus because you know there are gaps, you've written it down, you've talked to the vendor, you've made a good faith effort to do everything you can do to serve your student well, and you've documented it, and that will help reduce the risk at your campus. So who puts that together? Well, that ATI designee person probably should be involved. The purchase requester who's got an intimate knowledge of why we're buying this and who's going to do it, and disability services needs to be at the table for this discussion. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be face-to-face. Some of our campuses do this all by email. But those parties coming together can put together a generic alternate access plan. It doesn't mean that it could accommodate every possible thing that could possibly happen. And we're always going to need special accommodations depending on what the problems are. But it gives you a great starting point. And these plans can also be shared among your institutions so that if you have a product that has a generic equally effective alternate access plan, you can share that. So you're all starting off much further ahead. Okay, so let me catch my breath here, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, so that's my spiel on accessible procurements. Now, I've included all the roles and responsibilities in slides 18 through 29 because I'm going to send this slide deck to Marlene. She can distribute it to you folks, and we can't possibly talk about all that during this time frame, but I thought it would be helpful to you to see what we thought the roles were and how the responsibilities play into each of those roles. So I would like to open the floor for questions. Does anyone have questions about this process or how the roles and responsibilities relate to it?
Thanks, Cheryl, for all that wonderful information and for the websites that have lots of information there that's very in-depth and very concrete for us to look at.
Okay, I think it was a lot of information, although I do see a question, yay.
Yeah, so does the Disability Services Organization work solely with students, or are they advocates for faculty, students, and staff?
Well, in our system, they do work most closely with the students, and disability, I'm sure they assist. If a faculty member or staff member needs something in particular, they can certainly make suggestions or assist, but we also have equity and diversity offices on our campuses who really take care of the needs of faculty and staff much more than our actual students with disability services offices do. But I would hope they all work together to give the best service to everybody. So let me ask you guys a question, and maybe somebody could actually talk here. Have any of you guys thought about this equally effective alternate access plan at the time a product is purchased, and what do you think about that concept? Does that sound like something useful for you guys?
And I'm going to read a question from Kari in the chat. Kari writes, I noticed that your plan refers to large-scale institutions. Do you have any advice for individuals that want to implement these ideas on a smaller scale, like within a classroom or organization on campus?
Are we talking about the goals and success indicators, Kari? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's what I am.
Okay, great. Well, those certainly, you know, if you notice, there's a lot of them. But I think you could certainly take most of those and apply them on any scale and just pick the ones out that apply to the area that you're working in. And I know that most of you may not have looked at that stuff yet, but there's 142 success indicators in 3 priority areas: web, instructional materials, and procurement. It's overwhelming, but don't look at it in its entirety. Do kind of what Kari's suggesting. Look at it, pick the things that apply to what you want to do, and at least it gives you a starting point about the things that need to be done. They're not checklist things. They're sort of like business process, procedure, and practice things. So we hope that you will be able to make use of that. But back to my question about the equally effective alternative access plan. Do you think that would be a useful thing at your institutions, given where you are in this process of just starting to move toward accessibility? Okay, I think we have another question.
Yes, this is again coming from the Innovation Studio. Do you use any tools that help you scale, such as Compliance Sheriff?
Yes, we definitely do. We actually use Compliance Sheriff, and we have a system-wide contract. 21 of our campuses use the tool. Actually, we contract with CSUN, the Universal Design Center, Sue Cullen. We contract with her group. We have a system-wide project. They help support our campuses as well as iSoftware supporting our campuses. It's a good tool. It's not, automated testing. You're talking 30% of the requirements can probably be tested that way. But it's very useful, and I think it's helped us move web accessibility forward just from a visibility standpoint and saying, hey, we have this tool, gives us an opening, a chance to talk about it, bring many people in to use it. It's been really great, yes. And 360-530-346-5013 says, yes, absolutely, and I think they were referring to my question about equally effective alternate access plan. So I really hope that you guys consider this, and I think it will help your students and help you reduce risk at your institution. And apparently that's the DSS folks, and I'm glad to know who that is. Thanks.
Yes, that's Amy and Tim over in the DSS office on the UM campus. Thanks, Amy and Tim.
Yes, thank you, guys. Okay, so we do have a few minutes, and I know we'd like to talk a little more about the cultural change issue, but let's go because we did get one question here from one of your folks there in Montana, Robert Squires. He said he couldn't come today, but he does have a question about captioning, and I'm going to turn this over to Mark just for a moment. He's going to talk a little bit about that. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you. So this is actually a very timely question. We are this month actually convening a captioning guidelines group to begin working on formalizing a system-wide guidance document regarding captioning. And one of our primary charges for that process is to come up with recommendations with respect to how to set priorities as far as what must be captioned, what should be captioned, what may be captioned. So we don't at the moment have a singular authoritative statement on this matter. What we have done as an interim approach is to say we have a prioritization framework, and the prioritization framework is something we encourage campuses to use as kind of a thought exercise with respect to making decisions about what activities and what content types you prioritize as far as things that need to be accessible out of the box, things that can be put on a list to be queued up and rendered accessibly, and then those things that may be set aside as of lower priority. So prioritization framework has a series of questions that we use that talks about assessing impact and assessing risk and assessing campus capacity, because those are really the three things we want campuses to be thinking about is what happens if this is not accessible, who's impacted, what is the severity of the impact, what are the risks associated with that, what is the likelihood of that scenario occurring, and what do we need to put into place in order to be able to solve this accessibility issue. So we will have it won't be a quote-unquote policy, it will be a guidance document that comes through that will speak to this. As a general rule, what we tend to say is if something is used to deliver a critical academic or administrative function, then it should be accessible at the time that it's going live. So in the particular example that was inquired about as far as video content going up for a class, should it be accessible up front, whether there's someone identified in the class or not? As a general principle, yes, it should. Having said that, there will probably be nuances that we identify in terms of determining whether that falls into a must or a should. And that's what we'll be working on in the coming months.
And Mark, I hope we stay in touch on that, and when that is on your website and more public, perhaps we can share that out with the group.
Sounds great. Be happy to share it.
And Mark, there's a question in the chat again from the Innovation Studio. How do you respond to faculty who inquire about auto-captioning services within tools like YouTube?
Yes, there's a favorite expression of mine with respect to speech recognition tools. And the expression is speaker independent, meaning no training needed. Speaker independent 100% speech recognition is 5 years away and always will be. And that's sort of a trite way of identifying that the technology has had great promise for a great many years. However, we're simply not at a point, particularly with higher ed content, where you can rely on auto-captioning services for end-user ready subtitles, captions, transcript files. That's not to say that the services that YouTube offers can't be valuable as an intermediate step. What I think, and I don't want to turn this into too technical a discussion, but I'll just point out a couple things for you to go back and ponder here is there tend to be roughly 4 things that determine whether you're going to be successful in using auto-captioning services. One is the recording quality, and while some lecture content is recorded with very high fidelity, in many cases it's not. You know, it's a lavalier mic, and the professor is turning his or her head and looking away from the mic, and you can't pick up the audience questions and things like that. So there's recording quality, there's multiple speakers, there's accents, and there's specialized terminology. And that's present in many, if not most, of our lecture content. So I'm not dismissive of auto-captioning services, but our messaging has been pretty specific and clear, which is if you want to experiment with them to determine whether it's more effective to clean up the output of those services versus start from scratch, you know, go forward. But do not under any circumstances rely solely on those services to deliver materials that provide what OCR would consider comparable access or equally effective access to material. So that's kind of the short answer to that question. Does that help?
Thanks, Mark. That's really helpful. I know that's been a question on our campus that we've been addressing, and the Innovation Studio writes, that's a great answer, good things to think about. And Mark, maybe when you get this work that you're doing more fully developed, you'll even come back as a guest speaker again and speak about this, because this is a whole topic that we could certainly spend a lot of time on, and I appreciate this information.
I'd be delighted to.
Great, we'll take you up on that. And Kathy Stevens from Montana Tech wrote in the chat, this has been great and has given me some great guides of where to start in areas I didn't think about before. Thank you very much. Thanks, Kathy.
So, Marlene, this is Cheryl. I can see we're out of time here, but if anyone wants to talk about cultural change even after we're done here, we're happy to stay on the line for a while and discuss it with whoever's interested.
Great. I'll definitely stay with you. I'm very interested to hear more about that. For those that need to leave, I just wanted to mention that our next meeting will be March 7th. And Sue Cullen, who is a colleague of both Mark and Cheryl, will be presenting an overview of the Universal Design Center at CSU, CSUN, I guess we usually call it, CSU Northridge. Mm-hmm. And she'll be talking about generating culture change on campus in relationship to accessibility and how they view that to be universal design. And she also will talk about testing web applications and working with vendors there at CSUN, and she'll share training information and resources. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that webinar. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Let me add that Sue's a really entertaining speaker, and I'm sure that she will really share a lot of things that you guys will really like.
Yes, she's wonderful to speak with in person at EDUCAUSE, and we're really looking forward to having her join us here. Innovation Studio is asking, could you address the space where accessibility, culture, and academic freedom collide? That's a great question.
Well, you know, it's sort of a nebulous space where all that collides. I think faculty don't really have a clear understanding of, let's call it universal design for the greatest number of people instead of just always focusing on accessibility. You know, we've had digital information now for, I don't even know how many years, quite a while, but in the large time space continuum, it hasn't been that long. And it's only been maybe the last, I don't know, 10 years or so where we're starting to do the online courses and more stuff is digital and learning management systems are coming on. Oh, speaking of that, let me just say one thing. At the end of the slides that Marlene will be sending out, there's one slide with some desire to learn resources. I did want to mention they are doing a fabulous job integrating accessibility into desire to learn, and Marlene told me some of you guys use it, and you're really fortunate. I know the company they called us and said, can we show you what we're doing? And I thought, gee, great, yay, hardly any vendors call us and say, let us show you what a good job we're doing. So there are some resources that they shared with us that you might be interested when you get these slides. At any rate, back to the culture, academic freedom. At least in our state, it's a law. I mean, we're supposed to be providing accessible information technology. It's not really an academic freedom issue. We're not telling faculty what to put in their content. We're telling them it needs to be accessible. So it's a problem. I mean, faculty don't seem, and not all faculty, some faculty seem to think it's an academic freedom issue. I think it's a education and awareness issue. This is one of those cases where I talked about awareness early on. There's a lack of understanding. We need to build the bridge. Why are we doing this? What is it for? And along with that, we need to be sensitive to the difficulty level here. I was faculty, so I understand what their challenges are as well. You know, they're trying to teach their class. They're sometimes changing gears, like the night before, well, the class didn't get it last time, and now I need to prepare something quickly that will help drive my point home. They need to have resources. They need training. Training's not going to solve all the problems. You're never going to get all the faculty to do their own work. It's kind of a multifaceted solution. There needs to be training for those that want to do it themselves, some kind of service available if they need help. maybe even more service available if they need someone to do it for them. At least one of our campuses has sorry, a bunch of people just came in here. At least one of our campuses has started an AIM Center, an Accessible Instructional Materials Center. They've put their alternate media staff in an office that also has training computers so faculty can come in and get trained one-on-one. They offer training sessions to faculty. Faculty can bring resources to the center. Someone will convert it for them. If they need captioning, whatever they need. This is a brand new center, not even in operation a year. We're watching it very carefully to see how it works. But it's a two-sided issue. There's the side is we want things to be accessible, but we also need to be sensitive. We need to educate faculty and provide those services. I hope that's answering your question.
And the Innovation Studio in the chat writes, we've been talking about such a center for a while. How did you manage to achieve the goal of having it?
Well, it's actually on our Cal State Long Beach campus. And it's, you know, I think the impetus for it came about just from the things that I've just said. It's been a recognized problem in the system that we can't just keep saying we have tutorials for faculty, why aren't they making things accessible? We had to take a more proactive approach. Then, of course, that campus took that initiative. They got together a budget. They put together a plan, and they just jumped in. And, you know, this might be another interesting topic a little bit further down the road, Marlene, is to maybe have the Cal State Long Beach folks come and talk about this. Because
yes.
They're the ones that are having this experience. So we're all looking at it and hoping it's going to be successful.
Yes, that's a great suggestion, Cheryl, and I will definitely do that because the questions I get from faculty are about, you know, where can we go to test, where can we find the resources and learn about accessibility. So I'll definitely make note of that. Appreciate that suggestion.
And actually, one of the folks that was instrumental in putting that center together, Leslie Kennedy, has now moved to the Chancellor's office to take another job, but I know she'd be more than happy to talk to the group about the steps that they went through and, you know, how that all came together.
Okay, great. I have her name in my notes. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, so we did have the original cultural change question from the Innovation Studio. Do we have, when we talk about cultural change, as I mentioned earlier, that's a big deal. We're going to change your thinking, and we're going to change your job, and that's kind of scary. And I envision integrating accessibility into folks' job descriptions. In other words, if I'm an administrative support person and I prepare documents, now in my job description it says I prepare accessible documents. Well, if it says that in my job description, then first I need to know what is that. Second, I need to know how do I do that. And thirdly, I'm going to be evaluated on that. So then it becomes part of my job. The same for IT folks, or the same for people buying products, whatever. If that accessibility language is in their job description, it immediately becomes more important. It becomes part of my daily work. But that's a slow process because you can't do that until you've got some of the support and training services available that would be necessary if you're going to, actually evaluate someone on whether or not they're doing their job. So, Mark, do you have anything to add to the whole cultural change issue? Or some thoughts on that?
Nothing I can really kind of concisely convey here other than to say part of building cultural change, given the number of groups that are touched by wide-reaching accessible technology efforts, part of I think one of the critical steps early on is to have an advisory committee that is very multidisciplinary. Ensure that you get all the key stakeholder groups involved in helping to shape policy, procedures, tools that are available, and what have you. And I think that that can really help facilitate cultural change, because each of the stakeholder groups represented on your committee can be a communication channel for the person representing that group. They can be going back, so if you have a director of academic technology, you can be going back and talking with other directors of academic technology, and faculty can go back to the faculty senate and talk to them, and so that would just be the one little tidbit I'd encourage you to be thinking about very early on.
Yeah, that is really important, Mark, that multidisciplinary committee. We call them ATI steering committees on our campuses here, and they're led by the ATI executive sponsor. They generally have folks like the academic senate chair would be on that committee. Your DSS director would be on that committee. Somebody from procurement. The provost often is on that committee. So you're affecting a range of people. And then, yes, and then...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'll add something when you're done.
Okay. And in addition to the main ATI steering committee, we have subcommittees that are made up of the folks that are actually doing the work. A subcommittee for web, a subcommittee for instructional materials, subcommittee for procurement, because you got to talk to the folks doing the work. Really hard to change business processes if you haven't talked to the people that actually are doing the job. So let me just give it back to you, Mark.
And then the last thing I was just going to say is one area in which we're still learning and evolving is with respect to culture of change with faculty. Faculty are really at the heart of instructional materials accessibility, and that's a hard cultural change nut to crack. What some campuses are experimenting with is sort of a train-the-trainer approach. The perspective being faculty are often more receptive to acquiring new skills, changing behaviors when they're being when they're learning this information from other faculty. So there are campuses that are providing a mechanism for buying out a faculty member's time in each college, for example, and then they get intense curricula related to accessible technology, and then part of the stipend performance requirements is that faculty member then goes back and does train-the-trainer activities with the other faculty in their department or college or division. So just something to tuck away to consider when thinking about how to catalyze changes in culture and behavior with faculty.
Yeah, that's a very valuable suggestion. Appreciate that, Mark. And thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl has her email address for she and Mark in the chat, ati@calstate.edu, and you're welcome through our mailing list to send questions so that we talk as a group and learn as a group from Cheryl and Mark. Cheryl and Mark, thank you so much for your time this morning. This has just been really helpful and really rich. So appreciate your time and look forward to having more conversations with you. The recording of this session and the PowerPoint presentation will be posted on our website by Monday. So I hope you all check back there for that information. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. It's been great talking with all of you.
Well, thank you all. We've enjoyed this immensely as well. And we hope to get a presentation from you once you're up and running. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.